It's possible you might be making your vehicle worse with all the aftermarket upgrades you're doing. Over the years, I've built several adventure vehicles and I've had some amazing builds, and I've also learned some very hard lessons along the way. And this Land Cruiser, I'm still learning. But today what I like to do is share with you 10 common mistakes you can make if you're upgrading your vehicle in an incorrect way. It could cost you money, it could cost you reliability, it could cost you getting stranded out here in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about. But before we dive in, I've got something really cool to share with you. We're giving away an Ignik fire can. This is a propane fire pit, and if you've been following my adventures, I've been using these for years. They're compact, they're clean, and when you have fire restrictions, they're a good alternative option. Now, all you have to do to enter to win is go over to TrailRecon.com, sign up for the newsletter, and you're automatically entered. You have to sign up, though, before March 31st, 2025 at midnight. So, this is pretty cool, and I'm excited to see who the lucky winner is. All right, now let's dive into the 10 mistakes you might be making modifying your vehicle. One of the first common mistakes that people make when they modify their vehicle is they neglect their electrical and their wiring system. See, people want to put winches on, off-road lights, radios, refrigerators, but then they don't really think about how they're going to wire all that together. How are they going to pass it through the roof, into the engine bay, in through firewalls, in through the vehicle, up through the grill? You really have to give that some good consideration. And over the years, well, I'll say that I have wired and rewired again several times on vehicles. And on today's modern vehicles, things are getting more and more complicated because there's a lot of electronics, specifically this one, which is a hybrid. So I've got, I think it's a 48 volt system, and then there's a 12 volt system, and the main battery is all the way in the back. And so I had to think long and hard about how I was going to run these wires, and it's still a work in progress. You really have to just slow down and take your time with that. It's not something that you want to rush, because you could end up with a dead battery and be stuck out here, or worst case scenario, you could get an electrical fire and that could just devastate your entire trip. Now, I am very careful to make sure that my wires are routed very neatly. They're not going to get hung up on any metal. They're sheathed really well. Everything is properly grounded. I've got good connections, and really important is you make sure that you're using the right gauge wire for that application. If you have to run wire from here all the way to the back, you're going to need a pretty big wire depending on the load capacity. So make sure that you do your homework. I'm no electrical expert. I'm constantly learning, but there's a lot of good information out there that will help you. And using something like a Switch Pro or an S-Pod or a bus terminal makes it easy to wire everything together, but you've really got to take your time and do it right. So don't neglect your off-road wiring. Another common mistake folks make when they're modifying their off-road vehicle is they don't put armor in the right places. Now, a lot of people will add skid plates or rock sliders. This Land Cruiser came with factory skid plates, but they're pretty thin, and I added some rock sliders, and most folks think, that's good, I don't need anything else. But to tell you the truth, there's more to the story than that. One of the first things I usually do with my Jeeps is upgrade the differential covers, because the ones from the factory are pretty thin, and I know that's a very low point on the suspension that's most likely going to impact a rock or two. So I'm always upgrading those differential covers. Also, how about the lower shock brackets or control arm brackets? Those things are guaranteed to hit a rock if you're out here getting after it a little bit. So it's good to have skid plates, it's good to have rock sliders, but start thinking about some of that other stuff underneath there that's going to get hit. You do not want to neglect those. Another mistake folks make is they add all the things and they overload their Overland vehicle and they don't take weight into consideration. Now, I fell victim to this early on by adding steel bumpers to a Jeep and steel fenders and steel rock sliders and roof racks and all the things. And my vehicle got extremely heavy and the performance was terrible, and I had to make some changes with that. Now, if you add a big front bumper on the Land Cruiser, you can see I have a very minimalist steel bumper and a rear bumper and rock sliders and a roof rack. You could have potentially just added 400 or 500 extra pounds to your vehicle, especially if you throw a rooftop tent up there. And then you get in your vehicle with a passenger and all your gear for a long weekend, and well, you may be exceeding the load capacity of your vehicle. It's not going to be safe to drive. It's not going to handle well. You're really going to be unhappy with it. Now, what you can do is if you look in here on the door, it's going to tell you what your vehicle's load capacity is. And don't look at the manufacturer's website, because those are typically for a bone stock, unoptioned vehicle. You need to see what your load capacity is with your vehicle, with your certain options. And then, I'm not saying don't get steel bumpers or don't get steel rock sliders. I'm just saying be mindful. Maybe there's some areas where you can use aluminum, or maybe you don't actually need fenders. Just think about that for a little bit, because you're going to be pretty unhappy if you overload your vehicle and you're out on the trail and it just feels like a brick. Next up is where I learned some hard lessons years ago, and I see people making these mistakes today, and that is you don't need a 6-inch lift on your off-road vehicle unless you plan on just going and doing the Rubicon Trail and Fordyce and all the crazy hard trails every weekend. Most people aren't going to do that, and so you need to figure out what's a practical lift for your vehicle, because the minute you lift your vehicle, you're now changing the suspension geometry, and that can really have some negative effects on drivability. And let's face it, most folks' off-road vehicles are also their daily drivers, and the last thing you want to be doing is going down the road and it just feels terrible. You got to find the right components and do some good suspension tuning. Now, I see people mix and match components all the time, and you got to be careful with that. There's some components that are meant to go together, like I have this Camberg lift kit with some King shocks. They're paired together and it rides great, but some people will take 4 or 5 different manufacturers and slap them on a vehicle so they can get what they need, and then they're off, and then they're just very unhappy with how it rides. You need to make sure that your spring rate is correct. You need to make sure the shocks are tuned right for your setup, the weight of your vehicle. There's a lot of things to account for when you are lifting your vehicle. Take your time. Don't go buy a budget lift kit. Go with a company that's reputable and they know what they're doing. Now, since we're down here, let's talk about wheels and tires, because not everybody needs 40-inch tires on their vehicle either. While it's cool, if you're not, again, doing the Rubicon and all the crazy trails all the time, you probably don't need a 40-inch tire, because here's the thing. If you add a 40-inch tire, you're probably going to need to run a beadlock, which has a really aggressive offset and back spacing. So now they're going to stick way out. So now you have a tire that's probably somewhere around, I don't know, 130, 150 pounds combined with that wheel, and they're sticking way out. Well, your vehicle is now going to drive completely different, because those tires are, one, it's going to reduce your acceleration, it's going to reduce your braking, so now you've got to figure out ways to compensate for that. And you have to re-gear your vehicle, possibly maybe upgrade the brakes. Your steering is now going to feel totally different, because one, you've got a lot more weight, and two, you've potentially pushed it out a lot further, changing the scrub radius, which, if you don't know what scrub radius is, that's a conversation for another day. Just go look it up. But it really affects how your steering feels. You're gonna have to upgrade your steering components, steering stabilizers, even your steering pump potentially, depending on what kind of setup you have. Yeah, don't go bigger than you need. Think about what you're going to be using your vehicle for. Is it your daily driver and you're just going to go out and hit some easy desert trails like this a couple times a year? Well, maybe you only need a 33 or a 35-inch tire. 37s are great, a great tire, and it's going to get you through just about anything. No, not everybody needs 40s. They look great, but it's not practical, let's be honest with you. So right now, I'm only running 33s on this Land Cruiser, and I can tell you, for the drive out here and today in the desert, it's perfect. The next common mistake folks make to their Overland vehicle is, well, they add more horsepower in the form of a supercharger or a turbocharger or a really aggressive tune. I can't tell you how many times very close friends of mine have supercharged their vehicles and we're out on the trail and they start having issues. Sometimes it's just a tuning issue, or it doesn't run right, or even catastrophic, a blown engine. I don't think it's worth it. Now, you can argue all day long, are Jeep engineers or Toyota engineers or Ford engineers, do they design reliable vehicles? Well, there's a lot of testing that goes into these engines before they go into production. When you throw a supercharger on there, that supercharger wasn't meant to be a part of that engine, and it makes it unreliable. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying it can be a catastrophic mistake. The other thing is, when you do that, if you are under warranty and you have a failure, you're not going to take it to the dealer and they're probably not going to fix it for you. So you need to really think about that. Do you really need that extra 50 or 100 horsepower, or do what you have is sufficient? Maybe if you hadn't added all those steel bumpers and 40-inch tires, you'd be just fine. There's probably somebody getting ready to blow me up in the comments saying that they've had their vehicle turbocharged for years, with hundreds of thousands of miles, and never had any issues. And I say to them, congratulations. For everybody else, be mindful. You may not be that lucky. Okay, let's talk about the overlanding storage setup mistake that people make often. And I actually did this and I regretted it. People like to build shelves in here and put all the boxes and hang all the things off the windows, and then you can't see. And look, if this is your daily driver, and even if it's not your daily driver, being able to see out your back window and your side window is very practical, let me tell you. And so finding a way to build out the rear without having shelves that block your view, it just makes sense to me. Now, if you see here, I have a little bit of a steel molly panel on this side, and that's because I don't ever use that window. But I use my rear window all the time, and my passenger window, I'm constant looking out. If I'm backing out into the street, I want to be able to see, one, is there a car coming? And two, is there a pedestrian or a kid on a bike coming? And if I block that window out, I know that I lose a lot of visibility. So I would just say one mistake is overdoing the rear. There's a way to build this out and still maintain visibility. Next is a mistake that I think we've all seen folks do, and that is people try to build their vehicles to mimic kind of the SEMA builds out there. It's just got everything. They just like the looks. They don't really take into consideration the real world case use for their vehicle. Do you really need a $3,000, 200-pound rooftop tent on your vehicle 365 days a year if you're only going to camp in it maybe 5 or 6 days a year? It may look cool, but you're going to have a lot of weight on your vehicle. It's going to be reduced drag, which is going to affect your fuel economy. You're going to be top heavy. People add a lot of stuff to their vehicle because it looks cool and they see other people do it. And I'm guilty. I built a SEMA vehicle and I bolted all the things on it because I wanted to showcase what it was capable of doing. But the truth is, I only take what I need and I only bolt on when I need. When I went to the Arctic Circle, I took 20 gallons of fuel with me, but I don't carry those jerry cans with me every time I go hit the trail. It just depends on what my case use is. If it's your daily driver and you're going to be parking downtown, do you really want all the things bolted onto your vehicle? People can just help themselves. I've had lights and rotopacks stolen off my vehicles in the past, and well, it's just kind of a bummer. And so just think about, what do you really need to have on your vehicle? And is it something that, you know, when you go out on a trip, you can just throw on there for that trip and then take off when you're done? I try to make things pretty modular and pretty easy. I think that's a mistake folks make, is they just, they want it to look like a SEMA vehicle 365 days a year. The next mistake folks make is they want to turn their overland vehicle into an RV, and they add everything they can think of: sinks and power and refrigerators and heaters and air conditioners and bathrooms and all the things in here. And well, good luck getting up that hill with all that weight. There's a place for everything, and I'm in the process of building out my Gladiator with a camper and internals, and I'm being very careful to think about how I want to build that out, and I'll more to follow on that here in the future. But I'm not trying to build an RV. I'm trying to build a practical off-road vehicle, and there's things that I think you need, and I think there's things you maybe want, and there's things you definitely don't need when you're out here on your adventures. And so just ask yourself, do you really need a full sink with plumbing, or can you get by with a jug of water and a bowl? Just think about that a little bit. You don't want to turn your vehicle into an RV. Again, it goes back to that weight thing. Another mistake folks make with their vehicles is they do so many modifications, suspension modifications and interior modifications and engine modifications that, well, if something breaks, they now can't go down to their local auto parts store and get a part to replace something that's broken. They got to wait until the company that they bought, whatever that specialty aftermarket part is, can get it out sent to them. And if, well, your state's away and you're in the middle of nowhere, that could take a while. Whereas maybe you could just hop down to your local parts store and grab a U-joint or grab a control arm or whatever it is. You got to think about that. Is it worth really doing all these upgrades just because you can? or are you doing them because you really need them? I can say I've upgraded my Jeep so much in the past that I've kind of gone to the other side of the spectrum where it's, uh-oh, if this breaks, I'm in trouble. And now I think about, all right, it's nice to be able to go down to the dealership or the auto parts store and be able to find a part or a component to get fixed, get me back on the road, get me back on the trail, back out on my adventure. So just something to think about. Well, there you have it. 10 common mistakes people make when they're building their adventure vehicle. And I've made most of those mistakes. The key is to build smart, not just build to build. I'd love to hear what mistakes you've made down in the comments below. I think we can all learn from that. Hope you've enjoyed this. Until next time, safe travels.